It all starts in the middle of a brutal war, with fallen soldiers scattered across the ground. A man is badly injured because he just took a devastating hit. The sacred sword of the order struck him right in the chest. With that, the soldiers celebrate with relief, because they finally defeated him. This fallen man was known everywhere as the demon of the continent. His name is Archimonde, the most powerful necromancer of all. Realizing his end is near, the mage thinks he will soon fade away. It had been 10 long years of a war that spread across the entire continent. He strengthened his defenses expecting this attack, but he failed in the end. Looking at the pile of bones, he accepts that this was his ultimate defeat, and the one responsible for all of this was a single knight named Berkel Reinland. But the leader of the knights says he did not achieve this victory alone. He mentions that countless people fought so his sword could reach him. Then the hero asks Archimonde to surrender for the sake of everyone's peace. The necromancer gets furious and yells at the knight to be quiet. He accuses him of just watching while a plague took the lives of innocent people. All the knights are worse than animals, according to the mage, and he finishes his speech by calling every single one of them hypocrites. At that moment, a green aura surrounds Archimonde as he gets ready to fight. The soldiers are in shock to see that he still has power. Even in that state, the enemy can still use necromancy. His companions say it is dangerous, but Berkel just tells him to stop. He reveals that 20 million people perished and turned into the mage's army. Archimonde does not care and says the knight should not be so foolish. Berkel then accuses him of just seeking revenge for his people. The necromancer challenges him to say he is wrong, but Berkel stays silent. Then the knight says there is only one reason for him to be there. He stares at his opponent with a serious and determined look. With his sword glowing, he says everything is for the future of the children. Archimonde's body freezes for a moment upon hearing those words. The hero says he needs to leave his hopes for the next generation. At that moment, the mage sees his own corrupted form reflected in his eyes, and in that same look, he sees a reflection of himself. They were the pure and righteous eyes of a knight, completely different from him. Berkel then gets ready to strike for his descendants. Completely shaken, the necromancer finally falls to his knees. The knight then readies his sword to deliver the final blow, but suddenly, Berkel stumbles, and his men get worried about him. Archimonde holds a new sword with dark runes, and says one last thing. He asks Berkel if the knight has any final words. The necromancer then says with a smile that it is not so easy to defeat someone like him, even heavily bruised. He still seems to have a trick up his sleeve. Suddenly, a dark energy bursts from his body and faces Berkel. The knight is thrown far away by the force of the magic that was released. Archimonde's eyes glow with a strange and mysterious power. With the sword in his hand, he gets ready for his final act of revenge. An explosion of light happens, and the soldiers celebrate the enemy's downfall. Lying on the ground, the mage feels the impact of the final strike. While the soldiers celebrate the victory, his consciousness fades away. His eyes slowly close with a blurry vision of someone in front of him. And just like that, the long 10-year war on the continent finally ended. That was also the end of the demon of the continent, the necromancer Archimonde. In what seemed to be his final moment, something strange happens. The scene shifts to a large mansion during a stormy night. Two maids get excited seeing that the young master's lips moved. Confused by the situation, the mage wonders what on earth is going on. He was reborn as a baby named Klein and does not understand where he is. The maid shows him a portrait of the Duchess and says it is his mother. As they try to make him speak, he feels his baby body is very stiff. With a lot of effort, the little boy tries to babble something. The maids are amazed because they think the baby can already talk, but in reality, he was trying to summon his servants from the darkness. He yells for them to obey his command, but the woman just gets scared. At that instant, a lightning bolt flashes across the sky and lights up the dark night. The thunder scares everyone, and the mansion is covered in a bright light. 15 years pass, and the garden fountain now shines under the sun. A few girls look at something with an expression of surprise and admiration. A young boy walks calmly through the mansion's courtyard. They comment on his face and hair, completely captivated, and then we see him entirely. a handsome young man with white hair. The boy has such a perfect appearance that he seems carved by the gods. The girls sigh, saying that young Master Klein is stunning. One of them wonders what he eats to be so good looking. Suddenly, someone approaches him with a bucket and finds him. A man throws holy water at him, yelling for the evil spirit to go away. This is Garrison, a priest who found Klein's gaze suspicious. He noticed that 3 girls were already under his influence. Soaking wet, the boy asks if he ever gets tired of this purification ritual. Garrison explains that he needs to do this because Archimonde's soul is in his body. Klein denies being the necromancer, but the priest looks at his face and throws more holy water. The young man wonders if the priest is completely out of his mind. As he walks away, he calls the priest a lunatic multiple times. With that, Garrison orders his men to grab him and drag him away. As punishment, he says the boy will take a holy water bath. Meanwhile, the young man reflects on how he definitely met his end that day. He remembers being taken down but woke up in the body of a baby, and because his first words were a necromancy chant, he was treated like a demon. It was in this place he met the priest of the sacred order for the first time. The boy then observes the imposing silhouette of the man approaching. Garrison introduces himself to him, little knowing that this was the beginning of his suffering. This included a 24-hour non-stop prayer trail. He also forced him to take the famous freezing garlic baths on top of a purifying fire show where he was tied to a cross. And so, under the name of a purification ritual, he went through all kinds of harsh treatments. 5 years pass, and we see the young man looking quite unhappy at his party. His personal maid, Aaron, prays for him to follow the hero's legacy, but the boy seems completely bored by the girl's prayers. Fed up, the young man stands up and tosses his party hat away. The girl gets sad and mourns the hat that she made herself with so much care. Because of this, he feels guilty for losing his temper and apologizes to Aaron. The boy says he will pick up the item, but she reveals that it was Priest Garrison who made it. Upon hearing this, the boy's body completely freezes in place. He then looks at the hat with an expression of pure horror and disgust. At that moment, the priest appears right behind him, calling his name. The priest is thrilled because the young man wore the hat for an entire week. The boy then crushes the item and says with a smile that he will not wear it anymore. With that, the priest yells that Archimonde's evil spirit has finally revealed itself, but the argument is interrupted by Commander Dunkel, who arrives on the scene. He comments that the rumor about the boy being Archimonde has been going on for over 10 years, and that the Order has already declared there is no abnormality with the boy. Garrison lets go of the boy immediately and agrees with Commander Dunkel. Sitting on the floor, the boy realizes that the priest ignores him, but obeys the commander. From this, he understands that the priest knows exactly how to play the game of politics. The priest then turns around and slowly starts to walk away from the hall, but he says there is always a chance of something happening in the future. With that warning, the priest finally says goodbye and leaves, but he comes back to warn him that the next ritual is on Friday. The boy gets furious while the priest waves, saying see you later. Left alone, the young man punches a sofa, completely frustrated with the situation. He wonders how that man can mistreat someone and still be a clergyman. With a towel in her hand, Aaron asks if he really is not Archimonde anymore. The boy strongly denies it and says he does not even want to hear that name, but in his thoughts, he knows he cannot reveal the truth. Ever since he was reborn, his life has been closely watched because of this rumor, and because of that, he ended up locked in a monastery for 7 years. The young man asks what an executor is, and if it is someone high-ranking. With a serious expression, the man next to him starts to explain. This is the title given to the strongest in the order, which leaves him surprised. Almost no one can face him, except for the Duke from the boy's family. Impressed by his family's strength, Klein claps his hands excitedly. He then asks who the strongest Duke in the family is. The man says the 7th Duke is amazing, but the 1st is the strongest. Klein is surprised because his father is the 7th Duke of the bloodline, but the boy says the 1st is still the strongest of them all. The man is left speechless by the young master's conviction. He then agrees with the boy's opinion, just to please him. Aaron notices that the boy will not stop staring at the portrait on the wall. The commander then reflects on how no one could have imagined that. He remembers that it has been 200 years since the first Duke founded the house, and the boy realizes he still cannot believe what happened. He then looks at the portraits of all the dukes who came before him. Finally, he stares at the portrait of the first and strongest of them all. The first Duke of the Rhineland family was none other than Berkow. The Necromancer Archimond was reborn as a descendant of the man who defeated him. The former Necromancer remembers the moment he shouted his rival's name before falling in battle. Back then, the powerful knight revealed the main reason he had gone to that place. The hero stated that all of it was just to protect the future of innocent children. With that crushing strike, the villain plummeted in defeat toward the cold, snowy ground. At that moment, the young man wakes up startled in his bed after that terrible nightmare. Panting, he tries to catch his breath as he sits up on his room's soft mattress. The boy complains about that awful dream regarding his past life as the Great Mage. In the past, he went mad with rage and almost destroyed the entire continent using his magic, but he ended up being defeated by that knight and was reborn 2 centuries later in the future. Pulling his white hair, he grumbles that he will never get used to this new appearance. Suddenly, a gloomy voice coming from the door points out that the boy was talking in his sleep again. Smiling in a creepy way, the priest teases the boy about his memories of the past. Trying to play it off, the young man says he is just tired, and right then, his maid comes running in. The red-haired girl enters in a panic, claiming she heard everything he said while asleep. She repeats the evil lines while the master panics, begging her to be quiet. Then, the head butler appears in the room, letting them know the sword exhibition is about to start. With a fiery aura, the priest declares that the boy's purification sessions must be doubled, covering the maid's mouth. The young hare trembles with anger over this unfair punishment. Outside the mansion, he mentally insults that man, considering him a total lunatic. Walking down the grand hallways, the boy asks the servants about this sword event. The butler explains that the Duke himself ordered the boy's presence at the family ceremony. Surprised to hear that his father called for him, he takes the handkerchief handed by the young worker. The mustached older man snatches the cloth from the girl and scolds her for bothering the young master. But the boy defends the girl and hands her a cookie, making her very happy as she eats it. Looking at the large chandelier, he tries to understand the reason behind his father's sudden invitation. The butler then reveals that some relatives from the Branch family came for a visit. Frowning, the platinum-haired boy quickly understands the annoying situation waiting for him. At that moment, the snobby relatives appear in the hall and immediately notice the hare's presence. The group starts mocking the boy, calling him by the old villain's name on purpose. The guys laugh, recalling that he spent 7 long years wasting away in a monastery. The protagonist observes the gluttons from the northern branch, who only came to eat for free. Next, he glares at an arrogant blonde girl who is part of the Western relatives. The girl shows an attitude of great superiority while judging everyone around her. Ignoring their taunts, the main hare walks right past them, leaving the others annoyed. One of the cousins loses his patience and asks if that loser is going to ignore them in their own home. The snobby noble yells furiously, while the former mage finds it funny that they act like they own the place. With a cold stare, the boy states that he does not even bother remembering the names of people like them. He realizes that the main family is falling apart, since the newcomers disrespect him so much there. Suddenly, the attention shifts to the arena, where 2 young swordsmen are training intensely. A purple-haired boy prepares a furious strike against his opponent during the armed duel. The purple-haired boy cannot handle the pressure and falls flat on his back in defeat. Furious about the situation, he tells his opponent to stop holding back and fight seriously. The blonde boy blocks the attacks and states that the match between them is already over. With a confident smile and showing pure calmness, he says he does not need to continue that fight. The prodigy boy named Delane Rhineland, Klane's older half-brother, proves his superiority. Kleen watches the battle, noticing that it is this boy's talent holding up the family's name. Out of control, the opponent attacks again, saying things will be different this time. With his eyes glowing in a purple color, the protagonist observes the skills of both fighters. Delane charges forward with his sword, but the opponent tries to strike back at any cost, easily dodging the top-down strike. Delane stays in control of the situation, wrapped in a golden energy. He surprises his rival by moving fast with his special technique. The protagonist notices everything and watches his brother's movements using his magical eyes. Focusing on every detail, he analyzes Delane's speed, adjusting his footwork and energy. He watches the exact moment the boy pushes off, forcefully using the tip of his foot. Angry from the humiliation, the purple-haired opponent tries to land a decisive blow to the face. Klain is amazed to see even the mana flow of the secret art being revealed, and in a matter of seconds Delane delivers an explosive attack, hitting his opponent head-on. The referee stops the fight, giving the victory to Delane, who smiles in a friendly and gentle way. Showing superiority but in a polite way, the blonde boy warns that the opponent was going to get hurt. The guests whisper in awe at the execution of the famous meteor sword technique. The platinum-haired boy realizes that this was a clear warning from the clan's branch families. Looking around the grand hall, the relatives whisper the young man's name after noticing his presence. Delane walks up smiling and asks his brother if he had been there for a long time. He even teases the younger one, saying he would have tried harder if he knew he was watching everything. Observing his brother's perfect skill and fake attitude, the former villain feels disgusted by him, but he wonders the real reason why the branch families are in that mansion again. At that moment, the presence of the 7th clan head, Duke Heinkel Rhineland, is noticed by everyone. Klen gets startled seeing his father approaching that spot, while everyone falls silent. The Duke congratulates his firstborn son, acknowledging his effort to get this far. The former mage realizes that Delane is the Duke's only source of pride in the whole family. The commander agrees, saying that Delane's mastery is surprising for his age. Feeling embarrassed, the blonde boy lowers his head, saying he still has a lot to learn. The family patriarch walks past the protagonist, recalling the legacy left by the hero. Hearing those words of encouragement, the son bows in respect, showing his devotion. The man also turns to Klain, staring at him with a very cold look full of contempt. Without saying a word, the Duke looks at the boy, feeling ashamed of that hair's failure. Suddenly, and to everyone's surprise, the leader touches the silver-haired boy's head, but he coldly states right after that he does not feel a single drop of mana coming from inside him. The young man lowers his head, apologizing, knowing that without magic, he is completely dead weight. The commander tries to defend the boy, explaining that the years in the monastery held him back. Some people there start gossiping that the family's second son has no mana at all. They comment that the main heirs are useless, and because of that, the branch families should take over. Walking down the hallway, the boy thinks he can handle the insults directed at him. However, he remembers Burkle's famous words about protecting the children's future. Clenching his fists tightly, the young man feels immense anger growing inside. The former mage finds it absurd that he was defeated just so the Rhineland family could turn into such a mess. As the guests are leaving, one of the distant relatives says goodbye, while mocking the boy. A purple-haired guy teases him, asking how the young heir does not know how to swing a sword. The meddler keeps insulting the boy, claiming he is a disgrace to the family. Keeping his cool, the platinum-haired boy recognizes Dalton as just a worthless busybody. Angry, Dalton raises his fists while the protagonist calls him knave and incredibly foolish. Annoyed by the humiliation, the enemy stomps his foot on the ground with a lot of force and aggression. Quickly, the young heir sweeps his legs, dropping the nosy guy straight onto the hard floor. With a hurt nose, the defeated guy hears that he should not take his frustration out on others. The offended guy loses it and yells that the platinum-haired boy is just a motherless outcast. This makes the protagonist turn his head with a glowing, threatening look of pure fury. Seeing that terrifying expression, the coward freezes in fear, instantly breaking into a cold sweat. The former mage reflects that the real issue is those people's disgusting superiority complex. With magic running through his veins, The former villain wonders how that clan fell so low. He remembers the divine image of the hero who defeated him, regretting the state of his descendants. At that moment, the commander arrives in the hallway, telling the injured boy to stop making a scene. Standing firmly, the knight warns that he will not tolerate any more disrespect there. The coward grits his teeth, seething with anger, but lacks the courage to talk back to the order given. Turning his back, the intruder tells the hare to be thankful for having such a protective bodyguard. The loser hops away in a ridiculous manner, leaving the knight confused by the scene. The commander rests his firm hand on the hilt of his sword, ensuring the area is safe. The platinum-haired boy just watches his subordinate's attitude, with a somewhat distant look. Breaking the silence, the young man calls out to the knight, asking if he has a spare sword. Later, the two of them walk together through a dark forest covered by a thick fog. Stopping in their tracks, the great warrior hands the heavy blade straight into the boy's hands. The commander questions why the young masters needs a weapon so late at night. Gripping the equipment, the boy takes a fighting stance, trying to imitate his brother. The guard decides to return to the mansion, figuring that the boy still wants to be a swordsman. However, the warrior knows all this effort is pointless, since the hare has absolutely no mana. He reflects that someone without magic power will never be able to become an imperial knight. Swinging the blade in the air, the boy focuses on training, even though he is unable to use the secret art. The former mage closes his eyes, recalling with extreme clarity the moves he witnessed in the arena. Focused, he repeats the exact same incredible footwork executed by his brother. With a perfect jump, he synchronizes the exact timing of the liftoff, copying the brilliant technique. A purple aura wraps around the sharp blade as the boy perfectly recreates the trajectory. Suddenly, purple sparks start crackling intensely around his glowing eye. At that, the warrior turns around quickly, sensing a sudden change in the air. He is completely shocked to notice the strong aura coming from the boy. The knight refuses to believe that this is actually happening. At that moment, the hare unleashes a massive attack of pure purple energy against the rock, but suddenly a light flashes across the young man's pupil and cuts off his power flow. With that, all that dark aura shatters and vanishes into the cold wind. The huge boulder ends up split in half, leaving the guard completely stunned. Then, the platinum-haired boy turns around calmly, holding the blade firmly. He smiles in surprise, realizing he actually managed to use that powerful technique. The young maid looks on, completely shocked and confused by the scene. The commander watches with a bead of sweat rolling down his face, unable to believe what he's seeing. Suddenly, the scene shifts to the young man with his head plunged into a bucket of water. The commander then comments that the young man can already hold his breath for over 1 minute. Gasping for air, the hare hears the commander joke about the ritual being in a fish tank. The young man shouts at guard, who laughs and says he felt a sinister energy coming from his room. The maid dries the young master's hair, while a servant approaches to speak with him. The messenger then delivers a sealed letter, informing him that Dalton has sent an invitation. The silver-haired boy asks who this Dalton person is, and the servant explains that he wants to apologize. The hare then recalls the punch he took and doubts that fool is really apologizing. With the invitation in hand, the silver-haired boy is very suspicious of the situation. Reading the invitation, he discovers it's for a hunting competition and finds it all very suspect. The protagonist then realizes his enemy just wants an excuse to drag him outside. The messenger asks if he will attend the event, and the young man says he sees no reason to refuse the invitation. With a determined look, the white-haired boy says that, on top of everything, he has a trick up his sleeve. He reveals he has an ace up his sleeve as the camera focuses on a sword leaning against the wall. The former mage mentally replayed the sword movements he saw his brother use days ago, and in doing so, he ended up realizing something very important about himself. He realized he can perfectly copy any skill just by seeing it once. The messenger just watches in silence, waiting for a definitive answer from the hare. The commander then says he will prepare the carriage for the so-called hunting competition, but the knight says he's going along, and the young man points at him, asking what he's planning. With a serious look, the white-haired boy reminds the guard of something he had said before. The knight then replies that for some reason, he's feeling something different today. He says he feels a sinister energy as their carriage approaches the castle. The road is quite bumpy, causing the carriage wheel to shake nonstop. Inside the carriage, the young maid is feeling nauseous and unwell in the knight's lap. The guard says he warned her not to come while offering the girl a pillow. The protagonist explains that the terrain in the forest is difficult for first-timers. The great warrior advises the girl to get some sleep to feel better. The guard is moved by the kindness, but the young man quickly says the pillow is for Aaron. Lost in thought, the silver-haired boy just observes the scenery outside the window. Looking at the forest, he reflects that this place has also changed a lot over time. He recalls that 200 years ago, this place was covered in snow and the remains of the fallen. The former villain observes the changed landscape with a very pensive look. He remembers the hero and is certain it was Burkle who made this a better place. At that moment, one of the guards opens the carriage door, calling for the young master. The guard announces that they have finally arrived at the enormous Cornwall family estate. Stepping out of the carriage, the silver-haired boy wonders if this is where that Dalton fellow lives. He notices the mansion is more extravagant than that of his own ducal family. He thinks that for a simple children's competition, they must have a lot of money to spend. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice shouting his name and getting his attention. Dalton approaches with his hunting dogs and asks what the silver-haired boy is staring at. He boasts that the mansion was built with money taken from the hare's family and insults him. One of the huge dogs growls angrily while drooling all over the ground. The silver-haired boy notices the dogs are thin and asks when the competition will actually start. The purple-haired young man calls him impatient and says he knew he'd be like this. He holds out his hand and tells his rival to pay close attention to what he's about to do. The enemy then unleashes an entire pack of hungry and very ferocious hunting dogs. Dalton reveals that he scattered prey all over the mountain to attract wild animals. He explains that a hungry dog's sense of smell is 100,000 times stronger than a human's. With a bow in hand, he says the dogs will run, searching for prey drawn by the scent. One of the hunting dogs runs with its mouth open, ready to attack with great savagery, but the poor animals are struck by arrows, falling to the ground and crying out in pain. With a wicked laugh, the rival celebrates the success of his cruel and pointless hunt. The young maid approaches the purple-haired man, calling for her young master. He recognizes her as the maid Klein, always drags around and pats her on the head. With a frightening look, the enemy asks what a little brat like her does to be useful. The evil man then grabs the young maid's arm with great force and pulls her. Suddenly, the silver-haired boy grabs the rival's wrist and tells him to get his hands off the girl. With his eyes glowing with anger, the protagonist warns that he's about to break his arm. The rival is surprised by the hare's attitude and the strength he shows in his grip. Annoyed at being challenged, Dalton tries to land a punch on the young master's face, but the silver-haired boy quickly dodges the attack with a very agile and precise movement. With a crazed smile on his face, Dalton gets on a horse and calls for the hare to follow him. The boy mounts his horse and tells the guard to stay with the maid, as he'll be back soon. But the guard refuses and shows a magic scroll, saying he will go along no matter what. It's a signaling scroll that transmits signals when torn and requires no mana. The silver-haired boy says the enemy's father is suspicious, and if he disappears, it could be a big problem. He tells the guard to tear the scroll if that happens, and a crest will appear on his hand. Saying he's counting on him, the young master rides off as the guard calls out to him. The commander remains silent, watching the young master leave for the dangerous challenge. Night falls quickly as time passes, and the protagonist has not yet returned. Riding through the forest, the boy thinks that his rival couldn't have gone very far yet. When he arrives, he finds Dalton waiting for him, who says he finally made it. Lying on the ground surrounded by fallen animals, the enemy asks why the hare took so long. The The young man dismounts his horse and approaches, asking what he's trying to do. The protagonist is confused by the bizarre scene he finds in the middle of the dark forest. He observes the lifeless dog scattered on the ground around his crazed opponent. The purple-haired young man stands up and says, "This is the grand final of the day's competition." With his sword drawn, the enemy reveals that his final prey is the young master himself. He threatens to finish the boy off and deliver the result to his older sister. The protagonist scoffs at the Rhineland family, calling them ridiculous and powerless. With a wicked smile, the rival says, the hare won't get a chance to fight for his life. Suddenly, several hooded men appear, ready to attack the silver-haired boy. Archers prepare to shoot while cursing the young man for being born into the wrong family. The silver-haired boy just observes the whole situation with a cold, distant look. The villain says that tomorrow, everyone will be talking about the fall of the famous sword family. He even mocks him, saying the young master will become dog food in the forest. At that, the former mage remembers the hero's words about protecting the future of the children. A small, mocking smile then escapes the boy's lips, leaving the rival confused. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to laugh hysterically, unable to control himself. The enemy is shocked and asks if the white-haired boy has finally lost his mind. With a hand on his face, the hare continues to laugh at the pathetic situation he's in. His eyes glow red as he calls his opponent a cheeky brat. Seeing the transformation, the purple-haired young man is paralyzed with fear, breaking into a cold sweat. The young man says this family was built on his demise, and they dare to defile it. A dark, bluish aura begins to explode around the protagonist with great force. Dalton is startled, thinking it's magic, but the silver-haired boy says it's nothing of the sort. The hare then reveals that this power is pure demonic energy coming from within him. The villain's henchmen panic, not understanding what is happening to the boy. One of them is shocked to hear the words, demonic energy, and wonders what it is. The young man smiles and says he commands the ancient evil spirits buried in time. Floating in the air, he summons them to the light and commands them to act in his name. The energy twists, and the former mage orders the creatures to devour everything and everyone there. A giant skeleton emerges from the shadows, and he commands the creature to devour even more. The rival screams that it's impossible and refuses to believe what he's seeing. He then recognizes the army of skeletons as Archimonde, the ancient demon king. With a wicked smile, the protagonist points and orders his creatures to devour them. In a flashback, he remembers thinking he had forgotten everything about his past, but he spent 200 long years alone amidst a pile of bones and skulls. It was an endless period of days, surrounded only by darkness and the fallen. However, he could still feel the echo of the departed calling for him in the night. He could hear the voices of the fallen crying out to him from the depths of the abyss. That feeling and that resonance were memories he never truly forgot. It was a nostalgic feeling that made him remember who he really was. Back in the present, the enemy shouts that it's impossible, and this can't be real. He recognizes the legion of skeletons and calls out the forbidden name of Archimonde. The silver-haired young man smiles and confirms that was the name they used to call him. The night grows even darker, and the sky fills with heavy, ominous clouds. The henchmen wonder if the story of the ancient demon king was just a rumor. The young hare stands still as his giant skeletons prepare for battle. One of the giant skeletons growls, its red eyes glowing intensely in the darkness. The purple-haired boy and his henchmen watch the terrifying scene in silence. Suddenly, the mercenaries start to laugh and mock the ancient mage's skeletons. They call the creatures trash, and the protagonist listens with a dark expression. The villain boasts that he has destroyed hundreds of skeletons like these on missions. One of the mercenaries says it doesn't matter and suggests taking a bone home as a souvenir. The group's leader orders his men to deal with the ones blocking their path. The enemy's archers then prepare to attack the mage's skeleton army. On the other side, a man carries a huge crossbow and prepares for the intense combat. The archer aims the huge and powerful crossbow directly at the young protagonist. With the order to attack, the archers fire a shower of arrows at the silver haired boy, a large number of arrows fly through the skies toward the young man and his army. The arrows quickly approach the target, ready to pierce him with great force. The young man's eye reflects the shower of arrows coming toward him at high speed. But before hitting him, the arrows stop in mid-air, as if they've hit something invisible. The rival scoffs, thinking the hare was hit by the arrows and turned into a pincushion. But upon a closer look, he is shocked to see that nothing happened to the boy. The arrows were stopped by shields that magically appeared in front of the skeletons. The army of skeletons is now equipped with shields to protect themselves from attacks. The protagonist says that 200 years is a long time, and no one recognizes his skeletons anymore. The henchmen panic when they see the shields that appeared out of nowhere in the monster's hands. The hero explains that would happen if they were ordinary skeletons, but his are different. With a confident smile, he says that his skeletons are completely different from all others. The villain becomes even more frightened by the revelation and the young master's confidence. The silver-haired boy orders his first unit to break the defensive formation and advance on the enemy. He says he will crush those who mock the future of the North with his own hands. Then, with the order to attack, he sends his troops to advance with full force. The giant skeletons advance at high speed, surprising the mercenaries with their agility. The enemy is shocked and wonders since when skeletons could run so fast. With a battle cry, the army of skeletons charges into combat with ferocity. The mercenary leader shouts for his men not to panic and to hold the formation. But one of the henchmen is brutally struck by a skeleton and is seriously injured. The skeletons overwhelm the mercenaries, who cry out in pain and despair on the battlefield. The purple-haired boy is horrified to see the wave of destruction happening. The young mage then orders his second unit of crossbowmen to surround the remaining enemies. In the trees, his skeleton archers aim at the targets with their deadly and powerful crossbows. The undead archers are ready to fire at any moment, and with great precision. The surviving mercenaries panic when they realize the skeletons have long-range weapons. With a short and direct command, the former mage orders his archers to fire without mercy. The deadly arrows are fired with incredible speed toward the enemies. The mercenaries are hit squarely by the arrows and fall to the ground, seriously wounded. They cry out in pain as they are pierced by the arrows of the skeleton archers. One of the skeletons attacks the mercenary leader, who defends himself with his sword. In desperation, the enemy says this makes no sense, and that these are not ordinary skeletons. The rival realizes that if this continues, they will all soon be completely annihilated. He desperately shouts for his men to listen to him, but no one pays him any attention. A skeleton approaches the villain from behind, ready to finish him off once and for all. Annoyed, the purple-haired boy turns and attacks the skeleton with his sharp sword. He manages to sever the skeleton's head with a precise and well-executed strike. The villain celebrates, thinking he has defeated the creature by aiming for its head. But to his surprise, the skeleton's body continues to move and attacks him back. The rival is shocked, because he knows an ordinary skeleton wouldn't get up without its head. With a smile, the protagonist reminds him that he had already warned him about his skeletons. He says once again that his creatures are different as the monster gets back up. The skeleton then picks up its own head from the ground and puts it back in place. The protagonist explains that this is the main reason he swept across the continent. The villain is terrified to see the monster reattach its head with its own hands. The former mage reveals that spirits summoned with demonic energy do not fall easily. The surviving mercenaries panic and wonder what kind of monsters these are. They become desperate as they see the skeletons continuously coming back to life. The protagonist says that with his current body, he can only summon 11 of them at a time. He then asks the frightened mercenaries if they want to continue the fight. Suddenly, a noise in the forest draws everyone's attention to a new threat at the mansion. The commander and the maid laugh as they chat near the water fountain. The young maid asks if the young master really did that, and the guard confirms it. She finds it hilarious just imagining the young master's stories at the monastery, and starts to laugh. The commander smiles and comments that the young maid seems to like the young master very much. With her cheeks full, she confirms that she does, and that she really likes him a lot. She asks if the guard knows how incredible the young master is. As the enemy begs for his life, she describes him as kind, while a mercenary flees desperately through the dark forest. She calls him sweet, as a skeleton attacks one of the henchmen with its magic sword. The maid says he even shares his cookies with her, as a dark aura emerges. With a smile, she affirms that he is the warmest person in the entire world. Back in the forest, the protagonist faces his enemy with a cold, hate-filled gaze. One of the mercenaries cries out in pain as he is brutally attacked by one of the skeletons. The villain desperately defends himself from the monster's attacks, but is very tired. He yells in frustration as he dodges an attack and tries to counter with his sword, but the skeleton regenerates instantly, leaving the enemy completely hopeless. Filled with hate, the purple-haired boy decides he will stop the skeletons from regenerating. He realizes his real target should be the monster's summoner, not the creatures themselves. If he can take out the young master, all the skeletons will disappear instantly. The villain then runs toward the protagonist, screaming his name in a rage. He says the game of playing with bodies ends here, and that it all ends with the mage's defeat. Wielding his sword, he lunges for the final blow, shouting for the hair to perish. But the young man's eyes glow purple, and he clearly foresees the enemy's attack. Purple energy crackles in his eyes as he sees his opponent's every move. Using the power of his eyes, he can remember techniques he's only seen once. He perfectly recalls the sword technique his brother used in the arena days ago. The rival is shocked to recognize the secret art of the Rhineland family being used. The protagonist uses the powerful meteor sword technique against his enemy, completely shocked. The villain sees his sword split in half by the hare's strike. With a cold look, the young man says that Dalton's real punishment begins now. The night grows calm, and the dust of the battle slowly begins to settle on the battlefield. With the enemy fallen on the ground, the protagonist says he was right about one thing. If the summoner is defeated, his creations lose their power, and Archimonde never overcame this weakness. The ancient mage reflects on the power of the Necromancer, who used demonic energy, but it was the power of the Rhinelands that allowed him to protect this unique ability. His enemy's blood has strengthened him, making him even more powerful than before. Lying on the ground, the villain is confused, and the protagonist says he can no longer ignore this. The rival asks what he means by that, but is unable to move to react. The silver-haired boy looks down on him with a superior gaze, full of contempt for his defeated foe. With a final breath, the villain collapses, and the young man tells Burkle to just wait. He swears he will rebuild this ruined house with his own hands and willpower. Suddenly, the enemy wakes up in a dark place and wonders where he is now. He can't see anything in the darkness and feels something strange on his bound hands. He realizes his wrists are bound by thick, heavy metal shackles. Frightened, he finds himself sitting in a torture chair with spikes and chains. A shadowy figure approaches and says the villain has finally awoken from his slumber. It's the protagonist, who reveals that this is where souls go after they pass on. The rival is shocked to discover he is in the afterlife created by Archimonde. The young man recalls that Dalton spent his life mistreating dogs for fun during hunts. He committed atrocities under the guise of hunting and took pleasure in others' suffering. The former mage says he remembers the joy on the villain's face as he did all of that. Dalton despairs and screams to be released immediately, but is ignored by the young man. Suddenly, the rival remembers something important and falls silent for a moment. He recalls being struck by the protagonist's sword and should be lifeless. He wonders how he is perfectly fine after being defeated in battle. The young man explains that Dalton is already gone, and he is just returning the karma from his life. With a blue aura in his hand, the former mage says it doesn't matter if the rival believes it or not. What matters is that the time has come for him to pay for all his past sins. Dalton is terrified to see a pack of ghost dogs emerging behind the protagonist. The young man tells his enemy to listen to the cries of the lives he took for pure entertainment. The ghost dogs charge and attack the villain, who screams in pain and despair, unable to fight back. The silver-haired boy tells him to remember this moment as the torment he created himself. Dalton screams desperately as he is attacked by the very dogs he dispatched on his hunts. The pain is unbearable, and the rival begs for help, but no one can save him there. His eyes fill with tears as he suffers at the hands of his own victims. Back in reality, Dalton's lifeless body lies on the ground, covered in wounds. The protagonist observes the scene with his sword in hand and a cold, distant look. He appears calm and serene after taking revenge on the man who challenged and humiliated him. His skeletons gather behind him, ready to follow his next orders to attack. The young man turns to his creatures and says he needs to reward them for answering his call. He promises to break the curse that binds them and finally set them free from this existence. A bright green light envelopes the skeletons, which begin to break apart into particles. The protagonist watches in silence as his creatures are freed and disappear. He reflects on passing and wonders why and for what purpose he returned to life. A final rest is when the bones break down and scatter to the wind, leaving no trace. Suddenly, a hooded figure approaches and says he's surprised to see the young man use necromancy. The protagonist wonders if the man saw everything and questions who he is and what he wants. The stranger says there's no need for him to know who he is and smiles mysteriously. With a green aura in his hand, the hooded man begins to use his own magic. He says the young man wouldn't understand, even if he told him, and begins to revive the fallen. The bodies of the fallen mercenaries begin to rise under the necromancer's control. The eyes of the risen glow green as they become the stranger's puppets. The hooded man grabs the bodies and lifts them with his powerful dark magic. The silver-haired boy realizes the man is using resurrection arts to control the departed. The stranger reveals that Dalton may have failed, but their bodies will still be useful to him. With a wicked laugh, the necromancer disappears, taking the mercenaries' bodies with him. At the mansion, the maid calls the guard over to hear the young master's funny stories. The guard says he'll listen later and continues to look at the scroll with concern. He wonders why the young master would use an emergency item like that. 3 hours have already passed, and he has a bad feeling about what might have happened. He decides to go look for the young master, but is stopped by 2 castle guards. The guards say it would be a problem for him to abandon his post now and block his way. The young master's guard silently observes the men preventing him from passing. He recognizes the Cornwall family crest on their uniforms and suspects they are Dalton's guards. He realizes they were planning something from the beginning and prepares for the worst. The commander introduces himself and warns that he won't stand by if they stop him again. Dalton's guards remain silent, slightly intimidated by the commander's demeanor. The guard turns to the maid and says the young master is taking longer than expected. He asks the girl to return to the mansion with the priest who came with them on the trip. One of the guards informs him that the priest has already left with a very serious expression. The commander remembers the young man's warning and realizes the priest's intuition was right. He gets on his horse and prepares to go after the young master as quickly as possible. With the scroll in his mouth, he tears it, certain that none of this is a coincidence. He rides at high speed, sure that something very bad has happened to his master. In the forest, the protagonist faces the mysterious necromancer's army of the undead. He thinks his demonic energy was spent in the previous battle, and he can't use necromancy. With a bead of sweat, he reflects that he won't last long in this weak body. The necromancer orders his undead to advance and attack the young man without mercy. The army of zombies runs toward the protagonist with the mission to eliminate him. The silver-haired boy scoffs at the necromancer, thinking he can beat him just by using the same arts. Suddenly, the crest from the magic scroll shines brightly in the protagonist's hand. The enemy's zombies begin to scream and contort in pain from the bright light. With a smile, The young man says the necromancer is completely done for now. The hooded man is shocked and doesn't understand what is happening to his zombies. A powerful golden light erupts from the ground, enveloping the entire battlefield. Suddenly, the priest who accompanied the young man appears and attacks the undead with his light. With his eyes glowing gold, the priest invokes the light to purify the fallen. The zombies are completely destroyed by the holy light and turn to dust. The priest says the young master can rest easy now, as he will take care of everything. The necromancer is shocked by the man's surprise appearance and asks who he is. The priest faces him with a serious and determined look, ready for combat. He introduces himself as the exarch of the Holy Order and says he has come to resolve the situation. The exarchs are 3 human weapons who have sworn to execute the Pope's absolute will. They are the Order's ultimate fighting force, and the only ones capable of using holy weapons. The holy weapons were left behind by Saint Gall to protect the world from evil. It is said that each of them possesses the power of an entire fortress, and they are greatly feared. The necromancer feels the pressure of the exarch's power and is slightly intimidated by his strength. The exarch's holy light is so powerful that it can purify the necromancer's darkness. The hooded man wonders who this powerful man is that appeared out of nowhere. The protagonist reveals that among them is the one who holds the title of strongest in martial prowess. The exarch says the young man can rest assured, for he is there to protect him from all evil. The remaining zombies snarl and advance to attack the priest with fury and savagery, but they are easily defeated by the exarch's purifying holy light. The undead cry out in pain as their bodies are burned by the divine light. The priest uses a holy book to channel his power and destroy the enemies. He tells the sinners to listen to him as he attacks them with his holy magic. He tells them to seek forgiveness and pray for their souls before it's too late, and he will grant them a baptism of fire to purify all their sins. The zombies scream in pain. They are completely consumed by the exarch's holy light. The priest stomps hard on the ground, and a wave of golden energy spreads across the field. The earth trembles with the exarch's power, and the undead are thrown far away by the impact. With one last blow, he finishes off all the zombies and says that this is mercy, and with his light, he says this is the final judgment for the lost and corrupted souls. The necromancer is shocked by the insanity and wonders why an exarch is here. The priest's strength is so overwhelming that it sends the hooded man flying. The enemy yells in frustration, saying this isn't what they told him would happen on this mission. He complains that this kind of power is a huge lie and tries to flee the scene. As he tries to escape, his mask falls off, revealing his true, secret identity. But the priest appears in front of him and asks where he thinks he's going now. Desperate, the necromancer screams in pain and agony as his mind is invaded by the priest. He can't breathe, but the exarch says the prayer isn't over yet, and he should be grateful. He tells the man to be thankful for the judgment passed upon him by the divine light. In the name of the light, the priest executes the necromancer with a final, purifying blow. The man's body turns to dust, and the protagonist watches the scene intently. One of the necromancer's eyes falls to the ground and rolls near the young master's feet. The silver-haired boy bends down to pick up the eye and stares at it with a serious, thoughtful look. He reflects that the exarch just took one step and charged into combat without hesitation. With just his presence and the pressure of the wind, more than 20 bodies were destroyed. The young man is impressed by the priest's overwhelming power and his incredible strength. Suddenly, a bloodied hand grabs the protagonist's shoulder with great force. It's the exarch, who says he rushed over upon sensing the aura of necromancy. He smiles and comments on how strange the events that took place here were. The priest grabs the young man and says the aura he felt doesn't seem to belong to him. The exarch looks at the protagonist with a suspicious and doubtful gaze. The young man tenses up, thinking the priest is a real piece of work for suspecting him like this. He realizes that if he makes one wrong move, the exarch will eliminate him right then and there without hesitation. At that moment, the guard arrives on horseback, shouting his young master's name in concern. He rides at high speed and asks if the young man is all right after all the commotion. The protagonist is surprised to see his guard arriving so quickly on the battlefield. He feels his body weaken and realizes that using necromancy was too much for him. Seeing the young man collapse, the guard desperately shouts his dear master's name. The guard runs to the fallen protagonist and holds him in his arms with concern. He asks what happened, and the young man says his legs gave out and asks for help. The guard asks where Dalton is, and the protagonist replies that he eliminated him in the battle. A white flower stained with red sways in the wind in the dark, silent night. Back at the mansion, the young man explains he did it because his rival tried to take him out. Dalton's father slams his hand on the table and shouts, asking what the young master is talking about. Count Delkin Cornwell refuses to believe his son tried to get rid of the hair. He defends his son, saying he was a man of honor and a loyal knight. A man intervenes and says the priority should be finding the real culprit. He shows a document and informs them that even after a long interrogation, Klein didn't change his story. Furthermore, there is a record of 20 mercenaries sent by the Count around the time of the incident. The Count is speechless, thinking his foolish men should have been more careful. Still, he says it makes no sense, as Dalton was a knight, and Klein doesn't even know how to fight. Other nobles agree, recalling that the Duke himself said the young man has no mana. The Count thinks his son's failure can't be helped, but his own reputation is at stake. He decides to change the narrative and questions what kind of person the young master really is. He recalls that Klein is the son of the late Duchess, who was surrounded by bizarre rumors. The man accuses him of framing his son, and the investigator tells him to watch his tongue. The Count then accuses the young man of paying someone to take Dalton out and framing him for it. Suddenly, a powerful voice tells the Count to be quiet, and everyone turns to the entrance. It's the young master, who arrives. There seems to be no limit to the nonsense they speak. He explains that he acted in self-defense, and that the priest helped him against the necromancer. The Count calls him a liar, and the young man faces him with a challenging and confident look. With an ironic smile and his eyes glowing pink, he questions if the claim that he is Archimond is a fact. The Count feels a pressure, and the protagonist says he made a vow when he dealt with Dalton. He swore to rebuild the family with his own hands and won't let other pests get in his way. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, interrupting the tense discussion between the two men. A blonde woman enters the room and apologizes for her delay with an imposing presence. It's Laya, the commander of the Blue Lance Holy Knights, arriving for the meeting. The protagonist is surprised to see her there, as she was also at the fencing demonstration. Someone questions her presence, but the investigator says he gave her permission himself. He explains that Dalton had a history of missions for her Order of Knights. Therefore, she also has the right to participate in this important meeting for the investigation. Laya stares at the young protagonist with a serious and piercing gaze without saying a word. She notices they've made eye contact and decides she needs to speak with him alone. The commander asks to speak with the young master alone, and he is confused by the request. The investigator allows the conversation if it's just for a moment, and the young man wonders why. He asks Klein not to take too long, and the boy agrees to go with the commander. The protagonist feels frustrated with the situation and wonders why knights are like this. But he soon realizes this could be a unique and very important opportunity. He understands that her reason for calling him is one of three things: confirmation, suspicion, or a test. The young man walks with the commander and thinks that no matter what her reason is, he will use the Fallwyvern family and anything else to his advantage for his plans. The commander walks with firm, confident steps toward a private room. She stops and stares at him in silence before finally starting the conversation. The commander begins to speak to the young master with a calm and alluring voice. She presses him against the wall and asks if she can touch him for a moment. The protagonist is completely shocked and speechless at her unexpected question. Laya is the eldest daughter of the Fallwyvern family, one of the three great ducal houses of the continent. In a flashback, we see a record of her skills in a battle against ferocious orcs. She faces the monster's head, without fear, and prepares for combat with her spear. With her eyes glowing blue, she charges at the enemies with great speed. One of the orcs roars in anger, but is easily defeated by the commander's powerful spear. In the monster subjugation operation, she led the search for the safety of civilians. Alone, she annihilated high-level monsters, proving her strength and skill in combat. After the battle, she stands amidst the bodies of the defeated monsters with her spear. She became a legend for having single-handedly wiped out an entire horde of creatures. Back in the present, she asks what the young man is doing and if he isn't going to follow her. He says he's coming, but she dismisses him, telling him not to pretend they're close. The young man remembers what his father said about Leia being his cousin on his aunt's side, but she is the daughter of the first wife, which means they have no blood ties. The commander says that from now on, it's just her personal curiosity that drives her. Suddenly, she shoves him against the wall with force and stares at him with an intense gaze. She repeats the question, and the young man becomes even more confused by the strange situation. From the balcony, he shouts, asking what she means by that and why she's asking. The commander asks for his hand first and holds it with both delicacy and firmness. She feels his hand and comments that it's soft and smooth like a baby's, without any scars. The protagonist is embarrassed and thinks that she's actually rubbing his hand. The commander squeezes and slides her fingers across his hand and says that tendons don't lie. She looks at him closely and asks if he really didn't use a sword that night. She says his hands have no trace of someone who wields a sword frequently. She then questions if he used some other power to defeat Dalton and the mercenaries. The young man pushes her away and steps back, a little frightened by her proximity. He asks if she's going to say the nonsense about him being Archimonde, and thinks she's dangerous. The protagonist realizes she's not just curious, but looking for a reaction. He understands that silence is admission, and hesitation is confirmation for her. With a mocking smile, he challenges her and asks what she would do if he really were Archimonde. She laughs and says a shorty like him could never be the feared demon king. The young man is shocked by the insult and repeats the word shorty in disbelief. He is completely frozen in shock by the commander's unexpected offense. He asks if she's mistaken, but she confirms she isn't and offers to repeat it. She calls him a shorty again, and the young man explodes with anger at the humiliation. He thinks she's wrong, but the emotional damage has been done, and he's shaken. The commander says that if he can defeat a knight without a sword or necromancy, she'll kiss him. The protagonist is speechless at the commander's bold and unexpected proposal. The protagonist thinks that because of his internal injuries, he can't judge rationally. Confused, he wonders if this is some kind of political tactic or a bribe from the commander. She looks at the horizon and says it's getting late, and she needs to get to the meeting. She adds that Archimonde would never do something so bold and reckless. The two enter the meeting room, and all eyes turn to them with curiosity. The young man admits he was complacent and underestimated the situation he got himself into. He knows no one would believe he acted in self-defense against the Count's son. The investigator asks what the two of them discussed alone in the room next to the courtroom. The protagonist steps forward and grabs a sword that was leaning against the wall. With the sword in hand, he plants it firmly on the ground, getting everyone's attention. Everyone is shocked by the young man's action and stares at him, not understanding what he'll do. The investigator and the commander are also surprised by the boy's unexpected move. He turns to the Count and challenges him to prove his accusations in front of everyone. The young man says he will prove his own innocence and challenges the Count to a duel. He proposes a trial by combat to settle the matter once and for all. The Count is shocked by the proposal and wonders if the young man has completely lost his mind. Trial by combat is an ancient northern method of judgment with no rules or restrictions. In simple terms, the winner of the fight wins the trial, and the loser is considered guilty. The young man says there is sufficient reason, as the Count's son tried to finish him first. He reveals his identity as Archimonde, and has no feelings for his mother from his second life. The Count asks for a moment, but the young man rushes him, telling him to decide quickly. The other nobles begin to whisper, excited about a trial by combat after so long. The investigator intervenes and says tradition must be respected, and the duel will happen. The count realizes that if the evidence is thrown out, he might have a chance to win. He sees an opportunity to get rid of the young man and accepts the challenge with a smile. The count says he will send another knight as his champion and vows to finish the boy. The protagonist smiles and says he doesn't care and that he's the one who will finish the count. The count accepts, and the duel is set for 4 days from now, and the young man knows it's just the beginning. Using the count as a stepping stone, he will show all the scoundrels in the family who he is. He will destroy this family and rebuild it his way, with his own hands. In another room, the protagonist's older brother shouts that this is complete nonsense. He questions if his brother has gone mad, and if he knows what he's saying with that challenge. He warns him that he could lose his life, but the young man says he already knows, and is tired of hearing it. The older brother says their father has already given his permission, and the young man must accept the decision. He offers to fight in his brother's place, but the protagonist immediately refuses the offer. The brother says they are the rulers of the North because of their father and him, who will succeed him. The young man faces him and asks if he really wants to fight in his place in the trial. The older brother falls silent, and the protagonist says that would give them the chance to eliminate him. He knows it's frustrating not being able to do anything as the heir, but he needs to change his reputation. The protagonist says he has no reason to yield this to his brother and faces him with defiance. The brother says he was happy to have a little brother and constantly ran to see him. In a flashback, he remembers seeing an angel for the first time when he held the baby's hand. Little Delane was enchanted by the beauty and innocence of his younger brother. Back in the present, he says he doesn't care that they have different mothers and that he waited 7 years for him. Suddenly, the older brother grabs the protagonist forcefully and looks at him with desperation. With tears in his eyes, he asks Klain to listen carefully and reconsider the duel. The protagonist is surprised to see his brother crying and wonders why he's like this. At that moment, a guard enters the room and interrupts the two brothers' conversation. He informs them that Count Cornwell has already designated his champion for the trial by combat. The protagonist breaks free from his brother and asks what kind of guy the Count's champion is. The guard reveals that his name is Randall, an excommunicated knight who made a name for himself in battle. The doors of a bar swing open to reveal a muscular man with a wild look in his eyes. The reason for his excommunication is an uncontrollable and violent desire to take down everyone. In a tavern, he fills a wooden bucket with a strong, red drink. The place is in chaos, with bodies and destruction everywhere, and he seems not to care. The knight drinks directly from the bucket, with an expression of pure savagery and fury. He says it's been a while since he's heard a boy's screams, and seems eager for the combat. The protagonist listens to the description of his opponent with a serious and very determined look.